Okay, let me get this so it's larger. There we go. Just a reminder, this is your textbook. This is the 14th edition of Jules Benjamin's A Student Guide to History, and it is required and you need to have it. As I discussed in the video introduction orientation for the class, we're going to be using it not just for reading, not just for the heck of assigning something to you, but this class is, with all of these tutorials for the most part, self-guided as far as you have to do the work and do the reading. But the reading assigned is directly related to each assignment before you get it done. So for example, the set of reading that we have the first week is going to relate directly to what historians do in their professions, because this is what you'll need to learn. Even if it's not in a direct history field, there are skill sets that are very useful for any line of work that you get into with this degree. This degree will be useful in a host of different vocations, jobs, careers, passions that you have in your life. And so you need to learn them, and not the least of which is communicating effectively through good writing. Okay, so that's the book, and you need to have it. The other part, of course, of the book is that it has the style guide, which we call for footnotes and endnotes and a bibliography. It also has an example of every assignment that you need to do. So in one convenient single book, we're going to use everything in the course of the semester. We're signing parts of it. Sometimes we are going to reread sections. It has a sample completed research paper, along with all of the proper way to do citations, and with a separate bibliography at the end, which you have to do as well. So obviously we'll get into every assignment that you need to submit. There will be a lead-in like this in the form of a video tutorial, which will have slides, and if I can, I'll also show you examples. I mean, some of these examples are pulled from research I've done, but they relate directly to what you need to do. Because just reading a couple of the early reflection assignments, clearly there's a concern about putting all of your resources together in one coherent paper, how to organize all of your different sources, and how not to get too lost. I'll have some suggestions, but again, everyone works a little bit differently. The book has tips on how to do effective note taking and how to organize as you go through the primary and secondary sources, how to keep that all together and keep that all straight. Look, I've been there. I still do this. I present research papers. I go to conferences, and typically a conference paper, they tell you if you're doing a 20-minute presentation, and that's typically 15 to 20 minutes, anyway from 10 to 12 pages is the kind of length of written paper that you want that translates to you talking for 15 or 20 minutes. So it's about what we're working on now, you know, a 12 up to 15 page research paper. And that's complete with footnotes and endnotes, because very often when we professors attend these conferences, they are what we call peer reviewed, where people from different universities in your similar field of expertise will critique and criticize and compliment and give you ideas about what you might do with your presentation if you were to, again, expand it. So, all right, that's enough said about that. Okay, right here, this slide is essentially the notes from the outline that's in Moodle, the Word document that you can open up and look at. The date for the paper topic, which will be open in week 3. It's just a little assignment tab that'll be there in Moodle. So you'll click on that and you'll put in your assignment. The reason I chose to do it that way is that I can make comments on it like, no, well, hopefully it'll be more than that. But to give you, you know, sounds great. Okay, any suggestions, and certainly to customize it to all of you who are doing it. We are lucky to have a pretty good group as far as the size of the class. So we're going to have a lot of great diverse topics, I hope. The class in the fall was fairly modest compared to this one as far as the number of students involved. So I'm looking forward to seeing what all of you come up with, and giving you pointers on how to narrow the focus of your paper topic. Okay, so as we go along with every tutorial, we'll have this kind of slide that will show you the readings that apply to your assignment. This is right out of the syllabus. This is right out of Moodle. So this is, for the purposes of redundancy, this is the third time you're going to see your assignment for the first week of class. Roughly pages 1 to 16, kind of the first chapter, you might say, is an introduction in the Benjamin book. And some of the topics they go through are there in the boldface, you know, what history can tell you, how historians work, which you should get some sense of it now, being through 3 or so years of the history program. The philosophies of history, the idea that how history is written has changed through the years. And that has a lot to do with who is writing history, what time periods affect the authors of history, whether it be economic crisis like the Great Depression, whether it be the Civil Rights Movement, the Women's Rights Movement, the fact that we have until fairly recently, I'm talking the 1960s and 70s, that doesn't sound like recent, but as far as history being a profession, it's still pretty recent. Those who go to graduate school, again, are different parts of the population, which is a good thing. There's been more African Americans and women and minorities in these programs. And as a result, the writing that's done in graduate school and that is done in the history field has changed. And it's come from different perspectives. This is a good thing. This is a development which we call part of historiography. That's a term right there, the history of history. Also, the book gets into, in that intro section there, the different fields of research and how you can apply your historical skills. It's a question that we get from high school juniors and seniors when they come by to the recruiting events. If I'm interested in history and I get a history degree, what can I do with it? Well, you can do a lot. There really isn't anything you can't do. Okay, maybe some of the sciences, but certainly critical thinking and evaluating evidence and writing go into that. So even if you don't go into a traditional field that's associated with history, these are skills that you will use. And as far as in a field of history, you know, the book lays out some of those, again, ways that you can use what you're taught as part of a history program. Okay. The next part of the reading that's assigned is the difference between primary sources and secondary sources, and the all-important part of when a secondary source might become a primary source. So the book gets into details. I'm going to talk in this presentation about the differences between primary and secondary sources, how to identify a primary source, how it sometimes can be confusing to pick up something. And we're going to deal mostly with books here. Obviously, you're going to get into internet sources. You're going to get into journals. You're going to use the database from the library, the journal database. And for historians and for people in social sciences, the database JSTOR is going to be very helpful for you. And that's where a lot of articles, which are all digitized, will come from. Okay. And then the next part is, again, I'll cover this in the tutorial right now. Choosing a topic, some of the guidelines for the research, how to narrow and focus your topic, and to come up with a research question and to develop a thesis. Now we'll get into the drafting of the thesis. You don't have to have one now, but certainly want to start with a topic. And you just don't want to say something very broad, like World War II was important. Oh, yeah, I don't think a lot of people are going to argue with that, but you want to narrow your focus and then have an argumentative thesis statement. So the book will tell you how to do that. I will tell you how to do that. And you should have at least some idea of what you might want to think about as a topic. As I talked about last time, there's an idea. Your default setting as a student is to pick something very broad because a 12 to 15 page paper, the prospect of writing it is a little intimidating. And I'm right there with you. Had to do it as an undergrad went to graduate school, and within 2 weeks of starting, I had to have a 20-page rough draft of a seminar paper we were going to work on the entire semester. That was meant, I think, to get rid of students who weren't serious about going for their graduate degrees. But it's understood that it was a rough draft. You were going to share it amongst your fellow students and the professor who was running the seminar. But nevertheless, you might think, oh, I have to think big, like the causes of the Civil War, or Washington's presidency, or Louisiana slavery. All great topics, but you know, in 15 pages, there have been volumes and volumes written on these topics. So you have to focus, and you will enhance your focus as you get into the research. So let's talk about the difference between sources that you'll come across. And I'll say one more thing as we talk about how to start scratching the surface and finding sources. We have linked in Moodle. We'll get back to this in a minute. In Moodle, we have the links to first the library database. We have the LibGuide link. We have a link to the archives and also to some of the folks on the faculty. And if you go to the archives, again, you're going to need to connect with our archivist, Mary Lynn, and her assistant, Sharon. They're fantastic folks. But in the current situation worldwide, you need to schedule an appointment. It's hard to just walk in and say, I'm here. And I will tell you that with every faculty member that you deal with at the library. And I put up a couple of the folks you may want to talk to. If you're just wanting to learn the different databases and how to go about researching, I mentioned Debbie and Anna. They are over at the library in different capacities over there, but that's something that they do every semester. But I will say one thing, and that is give these folks a heads up, you know, give them a phone call. They have a job that isn't always just helping students. They're doing circulation, they're doing the serials, media on the third floor. And so they would love to help, and they are super helpful. But you need to just give them a heads up about maybe a phone call, what you're thinking of researching. They can point you to the databases that are the most helpful for you to use given your topic. And I said last time with the video intro and orientation, they are not researching for you. They are simply taking you to the places, the databases, and where to find the material. You can also look on the library stacks. I know this is an online course. Not all of you are in Natchitoches, but there's a magical experience where you just go to the library and you put in your topic and you go to that section of the library with the books and you start pulling titles off the shelf. Whether you be in a public library or our library, or if you're near another university library that you're able to actually use. So that's something to consider. And I will just encourage you to get help from folks, including me, on how to start getting your research done, because your paper requires primary and secondary sources, which we're going to talk about the difference now. But you need to have a number of them, and they have to be academic sources. You know, encyclopedias online are good for junior high and grade school reports, but not so much for a senior paper at a university. So those are your research resources, not limited to what's here, but this is where you get started. Okay, let's go back to the PowerPoint. All right, primary and secondary sources. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to tell them apart. Sometimes it's confusing that there's more than one version of a primary source. So I'm just going to take some easy primary sources and identify them and talk about secondary sources. This is a primary source. Now you might think that you have to have a primary source that's in a dusty archives. It's someone's personal papers or a diary or church records. Yes, those are primary sources, but oftentimes they're not published. So when you go to our archives, if you're doing a Louisiana topic or a topic that will take you to the archives at the Watson Library on the NSU campus, you're often dealing with primary sources that are not open to the general public. So they're not printed like this. This is a book version. This is one collection of the papers of James Madison. It's not all of them because that would be a multi-volume set. But the editor here has decided which papers he or she would choose and place in this one volume. Okay, this is the Library of America series. This is for folks who either research Madison or just want to get an idea of what he wrote, who he wrote to in the course of his life. So this would cover most of his life. Again, it's not everything. Another example, and this is where I want to kind of be very specific about what you see and sometimes the confusion in a primary source. This is a collection of letters between John Adams, Abigail Adams, his wife, and Thomas Jefferson. They corresponded during their life. Obviously, there's a deep connection here, 1776. And of course, John and Adams and Thomas Jefferson die on July 4th, 1826, the same day. I mean, you can't make that up. But also involved, and just a treasure trove of information, are the letters that are exchanged not only between John and Abigail, who was a sounding board for everything John did, even though Abigail didn't have really any political power as far as the ability to vote or run for office, and the letters between Abigail and Thomas Jefferson. So it's an interesting history in and of itself. So this is a primary source, so it doesn't have to be in the dusty archives, but folks have gathered this into a bound volume. This is a book. And you might think, well, the author isn't the editor. This gentleman, Lester Capon, is the individual who put together the letters into this one volume. He's the editor. So this is a primary source. And you might think, oh, did he write this? No, he did. John and Abigail Adams and Thomas Jefferson wrote this volume. And then he, of course, wrote the letters that made up this volume. And this particular editor put them all together in one collection. He was able to pick and choose or just find everything he could. And more than likely, this collection, which you can check out at a library, you can buy it from any of the online bookstores, and you may even be able to find it online. We are seeing more and more of these collections digitized. The George Washington papers are being digitized, and that's fantastic because if the library doesn't have it, you can get it online. And you can do the citations just as you would if you had a big, giant bound volume. Okay, so those are a couple examples of primary sources. This is a secondary source. This is a book written in the 2000s on James Madison. And what's interesting is it's just not called James Madison, A Life. He meant to get the potential reader's attention and people who are going to buy the book by calling it Madison's Gift, the 5 Partnerships That Built America. You know, when you all do your reading, you're going to pick up on your subject a primary source. Again, you can think about a topic such as something you were very interested in another history class, whether it be ancient Rome, the American Revolution, military history, modern China or Japan, the French Revolution. You're probably going to pick up first a secondary source because you're going to think, okay, I know a little bit about this from another class, but I want to read more. And the way you read more on a topic is jump into a secondary source like this. But the author who wrote about James Madison, obviously, like you, is going to use a combination of primary and secondary sources. So there's been a ton written on James Madison by people who are historians. Those are all secondary sources. But anyone who's worth anything is going to obviously use the primary sources, letters, accounts, state documents. I mean, James Madison was Secretary of State. He was a politician in the Congress before the Constitution was drafted. He drafted the Constitution in the United States. He served 2 terms as president, and he had a long career after his presidency. And so you will use primary sources to write this book, but he's taking his own angle on James Madison. And in this particular book, he's saying there are 5 individuals who he partnered with in the course of his life, his wife, obviously Hamilton, Jefferson, Washington, and James Monroe, if I got everybody correct there at the bottom there of that slide, who were integral to his life. And this is what defined him. So this may not be a birth to death biography of James Madison, but certainly it's written from the perspective of the people that he knew during his life. You know, he was first an ally of Hamilton, and then they had a falling out after the Constitution. And then, of course, he kind of became the co-partner with Jefferson on founding the Republican Party in the late 1790s. Obviously, his connection to his outgoing and gregarious wife, Dolly Madison, was part of his life that was significantly important as well. And someone who was an opponent and then later a strong ally, James Monroe, the last individual there in that cover of the book. Okay, secondary source. All right, so here's another kind of dichotomy of the primary and secondary source. Here's a much more complete collection of the papers of James Madison. You might not be able to see it in the slide, and I'll just tell you. This is 1783. So this is a bound volume. You can check it out at the library if the library actually happens to have it. And it deals with 1 year of his life. And on the right, we've got another secondary source about James Madison. Primary and secondary sources. Now, this gets to the idea of it's not a primary source that is a collection about one individual, but it's written by 3 individuals. In this case, these are, you're probably familiar with the Federalist Papers. They were written by Madison, Hamilton, and Jay. And they are, 80 odd papers. And this is one particular collection. And these 3 gentlemen are the author, but this particular edition would be put together by an editor, because the editor might write something about the Federalist Papers, you know, just an explanatory note in the opening of the book. And then on the right, we have a book about, this is written in the 20th century by Gary Wills. This is a famous interpretation of the Federalist Papers. Now, it's a secondary source because Gary Wills was a historian of the 20th century, and there you have it. He obviously would use the primary source in writing this book, and it is his interpretation of the Federalist Papers. Sometimes, as we have individuals, 3 individuals who wrote the Federalist Papers, sometimes here's the Library of America edition as well. Here is a theme of primary sources. The American Revolution, Writings from the War of Independence. Now, this book will have an editor, but the editor isn't necessarily the author. The editor is the individual, the scholar who's decided to pick and choose which primary sources end up in this book. Whether it be Eliza Pinckney from South Carolina, writing about the years before the American Revolution. Whether it be Joseph Plum Martin, who was a teenager who enrolled in the Continental Army. Whether it be any kind of former slave or enslaved individual who wrote an account during the time of the American Revolution. It could be a church sermon. It could be a letter from George Washington to John Hancock. So there you have a collection under the theme of the American Revolution. This is a primary source. You don't have to just think of it as being something that's written a long, long time ago. This was a pretty modern collection, but of documents that are all primary sources. Here's a secondary source. Here's a book about the military fighting in the American Revolution. John Ferling's been writing on the American Revolution basically his whole career. Another example of a theme and a primary source. This is called the Holocaust Reader, Responses to the Nazi Extermination. Michael Morgan is the editor. he would have found either survivors of the Holocaust or those who did not survive, but we have letters and diaries and such from that experience collected in this one edition. I mean, it's like the American Revolution. You got one theme, and then you've got, of course, different individuals, men, women, children, who have all contributed to this book. Then you might see, again, another themed type of primary source. This is often called an anthology. I mean, you're probably familiar with anthologies. You had to read a giant one or had to purchase or rent one or go through it in an English class. An anthology of American literature, European literature, ancient literature. And so what you have is this Civil War reader. Richard Harwell is the editor. Okay, he's put together the documents, the letters, whatever is in this one collection from people like there's Sherman on the left and Stonewall Jackson on the right. Oftentimes you will see a collection of primary sources in one volume. This is a book I've assigned, and some of you may be familiar with it if you've taken the American Atlantic Slavery class. It is edited, again, at the very bottom there, edited and with an introduction by Henry Louis Gates. So the scholar Henry Louis Gates basically was critical in determining which slave narratives would be in this edition, and there are 4 there. You know, the famous Echiano, Frederick Douglass, and Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. And he also wrote an introduction, which, again, is a good background to all these 4 narratives. That's the role of the editor. He didn't write the slave narratives, but they are right there in this one collection. This is a primary document. Okay. This is kind of an abbreviated interpretation of what you'll see as you read that part of the textbook when it comes to narrowing down your topic. The first thing you can do, and this is suggested by me, it's suggested by the textbook, is that you can use a historical dictionary or an encyclopedia. The Encyclopedia of the Civil War, the Encyclopedia of American Slavery, the Encyclopedia of Women's Suffrage. They exist, they're out there. And that can give you the basic broad information. And you say, this is the topic I want to research more. And then you get involved in that. Okay. When you formulate a research question, you want to make sure that you can answer a question. And this is a direct example from the book. Who is the first signer of the Declaration of Independence? Well, you can probably figure that out. You don't need 12 or 15 pages to do it. What's debatable is what factors might explain the inaccuracies of the fabled John Trumbull painting. Now, this is not accurate. First of all, not everybody was gathered at the room at the same time, and they signed it over several days. But, you know, Trumbull wants to make a point here, and it's a point to be, among other things, pretty patriotic. So you can talk about how the room didn't look like that, people weren't dressed that way, the representations aren't correct, whatever the case may be. But instead of saying, you know, okay, we can say very quickly who the first signer is and who the signers and the authors of the Declaration are. You know, a debatable topic is what factors might explain inaccuracies of the Trumbull painting. Which other sources were critically important for Thomas Jefferson as he drafted the Declaration of Independence? How did the committee, the gentlemen who were Adams and Franklin and others, the other 2 that no one remembers, the Committee of 5, how do these 5 improve Jefferson's original draft? Now, these are debatable topics where you'll have a thesis statement, where you'll say, without the committee and without the Congress's changes to Jefferson's draft, it would not have been a successful document, or it may not have even passed through Congress. Now, that's a debatable question, a research question. So that's the first kind of big thing you want to think about when you put together a research topic. And then as you begin to think about a thesis, you want to avoid anything that is too broad. And this is, again, directly from the book. Why did the Roman Empire fall? Well, if you're going to cover that in 12 to 15 pages, good luck. That, as a proposed topic, will get kicked back to you by me, and I'll say, nope, way too broad and way too ambitious for 12 to 15 pages. What's better is that you focus and you hone in your argument to say, here's an example, what aspects of the Roman Republic survived the rise of the empire? How did the Roman Republic, how it existed before it became the Roman Empire, the time of the Caesars? What's the continuity there? This is the fictional research question that they have in the book. So they have other examples as well, but I just want to pull a couple of them out. This is, again, just very quickly some of the pointers for formulating that question and then, coming up with kind of an argument or a thesis. The book gets into more detail as you get into the assigned readings for this first part of the class. Okay, and that leads us to banned topics. I hate to crush anybody's spirit so early in the semester, but over the years, and I've done this class for a number of years, let's just say, there are topics that I just am no longer going to entertain. And if it's one that you wanted to do, I apologize, but there are certain topics that I seem to read every semester, and a couple of them are just so broad and so ambitious and unable to be really dealt with in 12 to 15 pages that I just have to simply say no. Or the other thing is, and this is the unfortunate part of you being in a class with Dr. McDonald, I'm just tired of reading about certain topics. They include Huey Long, because they often end up being a part of his, his whole life. And, there's an 800-page Harry Williams book on Huey Long. And I've read it, so I don't really want to read a 12 to 15-page about it, unless you found something really significantly different to say, which I don't think so. Okay, the Andrew Jackson and the Battle of New Orleans. Nope, read too many of those. Hitler. Nope, too many Hitler papers. And again, biographies tend to be they're too ambitious, and you think you can narrow it down by saying how Huey Long or Hitler came to power. No, because that's too broad also. Henry VIII and or Henry VIII's wives, always popular. Nope, tired of it. Not going to read those anymore. Come up with a different topic. Sorry. The Louisiana Purchase. It's been written about ad nauseum, meaning too much, and I doubt there'll be anything new to really say unless you open the back of your painting somewhere and you've got a secret document that no one's seen before. Causes of World War II. There's just been too many of those, and again, it's way, way too big a topic. You have to focus and think smaller. That especially applies to the JFK assassination. I don't care if you think you have the new theory that solved everything. No, no, no. And finally, the attack on Pearl Harbor. During 3 of the last 4 spring semesters, I've had to read attack on Pearl Harbor papers, and I really don't want to anymore. So I am just absolutely thirsting for some new original topics that you might walk into the archives or schedule an appointment and ask the fantastic folks who work there, Mary Lynn or Sharon, is there a collection of papers or anything that has really never been, looked at before that people have utilized? And that's where you have unpublished primary sources, and you'll be able to find secondary sources on a topic as well. But there's one idea that you can come up with. Louisiana and the Works Progress Association. How the New Deal applied in Louisiana. We had a great topic with that. We had the writers colony there in Melrose. That was one of the amazing paper we had a couple years ago. And the other thing I'll just tell you is that we want a historical paper, not contemporary. So the Supreme Court hearings for the last justice nominated for the court is not a historical topic. The 2016 election is not a historical topic yet. I know it's 5 years in the past, but it really has to be at least 20 or 25 years to get any kind of perspective. An historical topic, not a current events topic. It's got to be, and it doesn't have to be limited to American history, Louisiana history, any historical document and any historical topic is fine and will be accepted, with, again, a few exceptions here, and I will very much try to help you narrow it down. But if you're, and I'm not going to find a topic for you either. So if you're having trouble, sorry, you better come up with something, because this is where you are with everything. It's one of the last semesters. It's the capstone seminar class. So cast your memory back to things you were interested in another class, may have scratched the surface on and didn't get into a lot of detail, and thought, well, if I ever have a chance, and then fill in the blank, you know, I would research more on this. So that certainly is something where you can get and mine your past for ideas. But I'm not assigning topics, and I'm not going to help you find any. So think it over very carefully. You've got some time, of course, to consider what your topics might actually be. So this will be the first of several tutorials we have in the course of the semester. There'll be slides, there'll be examples. I'll link the examples in Moodle. For example, when we get to the book review, the proper way to do citations, you'll see examples of it, and you will understand how to correctly do all the parts of the assignments and then all the elements of the paper. So that's how we'll go as we make our way through the course of the semester. So I hope this was helpful, and there'll be more of them as we go further along.